Hi everyone. So the evaluation of the DreamWeaving, the Auroville Crown process is of course very important because it is how we integrate the feedback from the participants in the process. And the evaluation was designed by the Citizens Assembly team, and it included both the evaluation on the design elements as well as on the actual process itself. So myself, Helen, and Anshul from the CA team personally conducted the analysis, and we'll be presenting to you some of the key findings today. The complete analysis will be in the report.
The findings that come through, they came from a survey that we gave to everybody at the end of the process. This was given to all the different participants, and we gave them time to reflect and even extra time to take it away because it was a very long information and form that we asked for. We asked the participants to respond to 12 categories. So these are based on the brief that Omar mentioned before. And we asked them really to respond on which up to 3 ideas resonated with the most and why on each of those elements. And then to analyze that, we looked within each category. So in the full report, it's actually got a summary for the different groups and what they found resonated most. But what we're going to see, what I'll present, is just a very brief summary of that. So we're going to be looking across all of the groups, what were the top ideas that resonated most. As I say, in the report itself, it will have the top 12 ideas for each design challenge. And it also will mention some of the architect names of the teams that were appreciated by those who responded. It wasn't always clear in the forms why they'd chosen particular teams. So for this, I'm just going to present the actual themes that came across as resonating most. And to say we picked these themes, or we sort of grouped these themes following the analysis of the data. So the first design challenge that we asked people to respond to was grounding the vision. So this was how much it synthesized and grounded the principles of the master plan and the essence of the 1968 vision model known as the galaxy. So in this one, the idea or design that resonated with most of the respondents was the need for sensitivity to an integration of context and ground realities, such as the bioregion and the canyons. And reasons given for this were that if we can synthesize this, people and nature, in a practical way, then we can start work immediately. Other ideas that resonated strongly were the idea of using the blue and green network to really help define the shape of the galaxy, the integration of conscious elements, so spiritual center, lines of forces, lines of light, and all the mother's qualities and symbols, and also using the galaxy model very much as a starting point or the essence of everything that comes through. So the second design challenge that people responded to was the human experience. So as Omar explained a little, this is really about how we create spaces for meaningful human experiences on a social, a cultural, and a spiritual level. So here the idea that resonated most strongly with most people was really around this creation of safe and inclusive spaces and paths. Noted quite a lot was for children and for elderly, but also for everyone. And again, reasons for this were to keep safe the youth that never ages. We also saw ideas that resonated strongly were the crown as a variety of different experiences, using different zones, buildings, materials, widths, and landscaping to create this. And then around sort of social spaces, so plazas and communal public areas, and having the crown as a space, a sort of plaza or a room, to really enable and foster connection with others. And many times this was mentioned, not just Aurovillians, but also those in the bioregion, those that work in Auroville. So specifically on diversity of experience, so this was asking people to think about how we can offer a diversity of experiences, yet retain continuity on the crown, looking at things like different zones, times of day and year, and visual interest. So here specifically, what came up most was really this need for this variety of experiences, zones, buildings, materials, widths, and landscaping. And reason given for this was really to create rich experience, a living expression of Auroville's unity in diversity. And then other things that people sort of picked out were very much around the need to define the different zones, so you could really feel when you went into different zones where you were through the environment, the materials, and the feeling you would get. And also the need to have multi-purpose spaces, so spaces that change over times of day, times of year, and even over sort of many different years. The next design challenge was around dimensions and proportions, so trying to find creative solutions for these challenges of width and scale on and along the crown. And here the idea or design that resonated most with people was about the need for the crown to change width according to the surroundings in order to minimize the impact in sensitive areas, help to kind of reduce and manage the traffic, and reduce monotony. The reasons given for this were to create a range of experiences and to enable the crown to really have this sense of breathing in and breathing out. And then other ideas that resonated strongly were the need for sort of diversity in the structures having buildings, bridges and pergolas crossing the street, and then for diversity of buildings in heights, lengths and shapes. So the next design challenge was around mobility, connections and permeability. So looking at how we really solve those challenges of Auroville, how we move around to enable sustainable conscious movement. So here the top idea that sort of resonated most was around the need for public transport systems, these electric shuttles, electric buses, etc. And reasons given for this were around the fact that it could be an immediate action, and it would help to reduce traffic, change mobility habits, and increase social interaction. And then other aspects that came up resonating strongly were this slow, quiet, conscious transport that prioritizes pedestrians, and again, making sure there's this real sensitivity to an integration of the wider context and ground realities. So particularly how we plan our mobility in relation to the bioregion, the existing roads, and the canyons. So the next design challenge was the bioclimatic principles in urban form, so designing with the sun, the wind, the topography, water flow, flora and fauna of the region. So very strongly, this one came very strongly across all the groups, was the need for the shade throughout the day and across the whole year, from trees, buildings, buildings on stilts, overhangs, orientation and other structures. Reasons, I think it's quite obvious, but this need for continual shade for pedestrian comfort, and people especially noted and liked the cooling that trees could naturally provide. So other aspects that resonated here were the possibility and need to reduce runoff through vegetation, permeable materials linked to waterways, and also the integration of indigenous trees, flora and species, because they require minimal maintenance and water. So the next design challenge was around water, so how we consider the flows of water as a solution for our water security, as well as a spatial experiential element. So here again, there was really strong resonance across all of the groups for prioritizing the creation and conservation of water catchment areas. And this came across in many ways, in systems integrated into buildings and urban form in a joyful way. Maybe those water flowers that we saw before, as well as prioritizing the natural water catchment areas. And along with this, there were also ideas around these kind of water features, waterfalls, water channels that resonated. Again, they're reducing runoff through vegetation or permeable materials, and specifically kuns and columns as well. So the next design challenge was around city of nature, so the integration of the built spaces, both solids and voids, with natural ecosystems. So here, the idea that resonated most was this need to really synthesize city and nature. So people responded saying that they saw nature and city as inseparable and wanted to see an ever-changing interaction of built-up green, blue spaces. Also strongly was this support for using the existing form as assets, the trees and parks that are already there. And it was noted that many cities around the world are spending a lot of energy to revert to greener urban models, and we can do that from the start. And then again here, we saw the sensitivity and integration of the context, the ground realities. Green corridors were also mentioned many times, connecting green spaces and pockets, and integrating surface water collection and recycling. So I should probably note some of them have got more because it means there were sort of equal responses for them, for the top three. So on density and phasing, this was looking at how we really phase the implementation to respond for sort of changes of densities and over time. And the thing that resonated most here was really that need for phasing, to build what is required now and then expand later as is needed. Alongside this, there were many ideas on how we could start with that, particularly mentioning sort of solar kitchen area and the plaza, the potential to prototype for places. Again, solar kitchen to Arca stretch came up a lot. Prototyping with mobility, so closing some streets, different times, different access points, and also creating quick shade structures. And with this, people also suggested to start with the activity clusters in each zone to reinforce the existing development, and again, using what's there as assets to begin with. So enriching the existing development builds on that a little bit. So this is how we can enhance the function, the quality and the experience of what's already there in terms of building space and infrastructure. And again, this really echoes what we just saw. So starting with the activity clusters, building what's required and expanding later, and using the existing form as assets. So with this, I think the reasons were that it just seems logical, it will help with growth, and it will keep a certain warmth in the development of the city. So design for change was the next design challenge, and this was really looking about how we can plan for the future, how we can make it adaptable for what's needed. And here what resonated most was this potential for having these multi-purpose spaces that can change over time. So something that could be maybe transitional in use and then utilised for something else in the future, or maybe utilised for parking now or in future. And alongside this was the flexible approach to infrastructure. I think we saw the conduits mentioned. So those trenches came up a few times to allow for new technologies, and also phasing build what's required now and expanding later. And then the final design challenge that we asked people to respond to was around the essence of Auroville. So this is how we could express the poetry, the ideas, and the experimental nature of Auroville. And with this, the ideas that resonated most with people were really around that playfulness, that fun, and that sense of discovery. And when we're talking about discovery, it's not just sort of what's out there in the external environment. It was also about creating the spaces and the places and the pauses for us to be able to have that inner discovery as well. And again, very much the Crown as a space for social connection, again, came up strongly here, somewhere where we can meet people, we can connect. And then finally, art and beauty as an integral part of the Crown. So those are what came up for people responding on the design elements that they were looking at. So I'm going to hand back to Saria Mai.
So feedback on the process. So we collected feedback from all participants, including the DreamWeaving architects, via just a questionnaire at the very end of the process. But just to say, before we did that, we actually ended the whole process with various reflection circles, where each participant could just share, in a circle, what were the key highlights, takeaway of the process for them, so that everyone had a chance to kind of hear from each other. So the process questionnaire was in two parts. The first just asked participants to rate their overall experience and also the very key aspects of a process like this one. So first was the clarity and quality of the content, the actual presentations by the architects. Second was the quality of interactions between the architects and other participants. Then the clarity of information provided by the organizing team. And finally, the facilitation support provided during the process. And just to say that why were we collecting feedback on this? Why does it matter? Well, it matters because it's designed to offer you, the community, as well as Vastushilpa and our own team, really a quick sense of the actual quality of this process, and also enable us in future to have a sense of what were some maybe key challenge areas if that came up at all. So I'm just going to run through very briefly these ratings. So to clarify a little bit these different participant groups, you've heard about that earlier, but I want to make that even clearer. So first, the peer and DreamWeaving architects, that's quite obvious. Technical experts, these were the multidisciplinary experts that also presented and participated in the process. Focus group participants were participants who really embodied different aspects and areas of life in Auroville, whether it was from education, from healing, from green work. So to really kind of bring these various perspectives of the Auroville experience to the table. And then finally, the randomly selected participants. So you can see they all rated it pretty similarly, and it was pretty high in terms of their overall experience. Again, similar for the actual clarity and quality of the content. Similar again for the quality of interaction between the architects and other participants. Same for the clarity information provided by the organizing team, and for the facilitation support provided during the process. So clearly, overall, each participant group rated the various aspects of the process really positively. However, we do want to note that there were a few of the randomly selected participants that did drop out during the process. And the reasons that were given were just the really long day format, which was really tiring, and also, the kind of heavy sort of presentation after presentation, which people found difficult to integrate. So just to note that that is actually also a reality of some of the participants. So the second part of the questionnaire was more open questions, where people really had a chance to speak more freely about some of the different, just to get some more rich and detailed inputs. So we asked, what did you actually find to be the most important or valuable aspects of this process? What were the most challenging? What did you consider to be key takeaways? We also asked whether participants would recommend using this process for other collaborative planning or design topics in Auroville, and just an open question if they had any comments or suggestions for the future. So most important or valuable aspects of the process. So what came up really high was involvement and collaboration. This is what people found incredibly valuable. So between the architects and the experts, and also between the participants in the room. So one participant said, really a movement of goodwill in the spirit of collaboration and participation. The other thing people found very valuable and important was the actual integration of views. So not just that everyone came to the table and collaborated, but there was a real, weaving together of various views. Which someone described really as a diversity of ideas and yet an underlying unity. The fact that this was actually a community response, it was a harmonious community-based response to a crisis situation, and that it was an educational and structured process by which various points of views, technical expertise actually had a platform and a structure to work together on. So in terms of the most challenging, Time was what came up again and again and again and again in different forms. The short time for presentations, which was obviously challenging for the architects. The short time for the overall process, how much we had to fit in such a short amount of time. So resulting in really long days and really tight last-minute schedules, and just kind of the feeling of insufficient time to really fully integrate everything that was being offered and provided. So people were saying, the ability for architects to integrate their ideas with those offered in such a short time, also for us to grasp all the amazing gems that sprang from it. Not enough time to complete the process fully, to overlay all of the proposals into a community offer to Vastu Shilpa. Key takeaways. Basically, that involvement and collaboration enriches the process and the outputs developed, that when we have various people coming to the table, that we just get something better. That the Auroville community really has an exemplary capacity to respond collectively to a challenge. Again, the educational aspect of the process, including being exposed to this diversity of perspectives. And a lot of people said, this process has a potential to be a model for addressing further planning needs and other community topics in Auroville. So just a few quotes here. The power in Aurovillians work together. It's irresistible. There are a lot of competent people in Auroville in their fields. There's a need for more interaction and trust between these experts and the working groups which make the decisions and implement them. This process has been a great example for organizing things in a proper way and getting the community involved. Key takeaways are togetherness and community, proper organization, and that the whole process has been a masterclass in itself. So in answer to the question, would you actually recommend using this process for other collaborative planning or design topics in Auroville? It was an overwhelming yes. So every single participant who answered this question said yes. There was only one question in which this was left blank, so maybe the person missed it or they abstained, but otherwise, overwhelming yes. And people said, this in fact should be the template for even other parts of the Galaxy plan, from larger to smaller parts. And others felt it should be integrated in our governance system. So in terms of the comments and suggestions, so inputs on the actual process and its organization, it was felt that we could actually widen the representation and have a wider diversity of participants and perspectives. So specific suggestions were to include more youth in the process, and also others than just architects in the actual designing process. There was suggestion to actually improve the information presented and provided, so more advanced sharing of the information, perhaps a clear format for presentations, and also clarity on whether and how the feedback had been integrated by the DreamWeaving architects. So we could have made some improvements there in the format. And yeah, the wish for a less tight time frame, specifically allowing time for more reflections and more informal exchanges, which this very tight and kind of structured process didn't really allow for. Many people also expressed their gratitude and appreciation for the process, for how it was led, for how participants engaged in it, which people found really heartening and really relieving in the crisis context in which it was held. So we have a quote here. I think that given the pressure Auroville has and is experiencing right now and the unclarity of what will happen at any given moment, the process and all participants were showing a very beautiful side of Auroville, its diversity, its capability, and its longing for union and process. Only that the rigid time frame necessary was difficult in terms of having more in-depth exchanges. There were also concerns expressed in this section, particularly around follow-up. In terms of implementation, saying, okay, we need to ensure that the process leads to implementation with quality on time. The challenging part is going to be from the organizers to get approval from the community or from the necessary groups to actually implement the ideas, maybe. And there was also a suggestion to actually begin follow-up within the community. So perhaps some small actions to follow up on the Crown to animate the spaces already while we wait for VSF. So to actually ourselves take some of that responsibility and initiative to kind of start to, animate these outcomes. So basically, in summary, participants were clearly positive about this DreamWeaving process and would recommend using it again for planning or other community topics in Auroville. It was hoped that in future the time frame would be less restrictive, allowing the process to include more space for informal exchanges and reflection, and that a wider representation of community members, especially youth, and perspectives, so widening designers to include other than architects, be included. So as mentioned earlier, all of this, the full analysis is going to be included in a report that the CA team is preparing, and that will be completed once we've actually gathered the community evaluation that I just mentioned. So just to give you a little preview, the report will begin just with an introduction and context. So what was the context in which this process actually arose and was held? A little bit of background on what is DreamWeaving, because it does have a history in this community. It'll include summaries of the analytical work conference, the DreamWeaving presentations, and all of the feedback received. A point on community engagement. So this was part of our team went out and collected inputs from schools. Conclusion and next steps. And just to note that access to all the recordings, the designs, the evaluation data, all of this will be in a resource guide that will be accessible alongside the report.